Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and a book that I got for super cheap because you can see that says $1 on the stickers on the cover. But the actual listed price is $22.50 in Canada. I mean, in the year that it was initially being sold and printed and stuff. This is not my favorite of Dave Barry's books. It's not my least favorite, because it is amusing. The key to really approaching this book is to keep in mind that he is well aware, and he says this repeatedly, that this is not supposed to be taken as a deep understanding look of, deep cultural analysis. It's not supposed to be a book by somebody who has a deep personal understanding or connection with Japan. This is a book very much about culture clash and how culture clash really, really works. I mean, it's also funny. I mean, it's supposed to be funny, but ultimately, if you want to talk about it seriously, which you really shouldn't because it's just supposed to be funny, but if you want to talk about it seriously, you need to approach this from the perspective of, this is how people think when faced with a culture that is as alien to their own as a culture of the Far East and a Western culture. Because the social mores are different, aspects of values are different, the things that are considered to be more important are different. That, one can say you can say all you like things about how everybody's human, so we all value the same things, but the weight that you put on the things that you value is going to be different. Americans, because this is Dave Barry, who is an American, tend to value freedom and individuality, at least within a given set of limitations of freedom and individuality, whereas the Japanese tend to be far more interested in order and politeness and a whole bunch of other things. And it's not that Americans, or we in the West generally, don't have a certain amount, don't put value on order and politeness. At the same time, we have a much more relaxed view of what is considered to be polite than do the Japanese. And it's something that you can find if you want to look up all of those YouTube videos about, being an American living in Japan and how it's different, and the ways that it is significantly different from living in America, or indeed a Japanese person who is discussing why it's different for them living in America as compared, or living in the West as compared to living in Japan. And of course he's critical because it's because it's right there. It is right there to be critical that the Japanese are quote unquote behind in rock and roll. That's because rock and roll is a fundamentally Western, indeed American style of music, and there is no reason for Japan to have particularly adopted it beyond, of course, at the time of this book, being a book that was published in, hang on, no notes, have to look, 1992. Back in 1992, you've got you've got less westernization happening. And I think also somewhat less of the fetishization of the Japanese that we have now. I mean, it may just be by virtue of the fact that I practically live on the internet, but, and by fetishization of the Japanese, I'm talking about the difference between, men who say, oh, Asian chicks are hot and will walk on your back, and people who decide to dress up as anime characters, and because they have learned 3 words in Japanese from watching anime, think that they are practically Japanese. And that's really what I mean by fetishization of the culture. The thing is that he is coming to Japan in 1990, 91, whenever he did it, and looking at Japan and seeing the Japanese effectively fetishizing American culture in exactly the same way. And so he talks about these Japanese kids who are listening to third-rate rock music, who are listening to old American rock music, and who have this weird uniformity in, showing up at a battle of the bands that's going on, because the culture that they come from is so very fundamentally different from American culture that it's like they're missing how the counterculture aspects of rock really function, because they know they like it and they know they like the counterculture aspect of it, but they don't really understand it because there's something very visceral to it that they don't get. At the same time, however, Dave Barry is very, very careful, very, very aware that he doesn't get their culture. He doesn't get how and why they are so polite. He's taken aback when he is trying to ask for help in a train station and the person that he's talking to doesn't know English. And he said that this person seemed genuinely distressed that he, a Japanese person in Japan, didn't speak English, which, of course, is ridiculous. Why should you feel guilty that you don't speak a foreign language in your own country? There's no reason to feel bad that you cannot give a person directions who does not speak the language that you predominantly speak around there. There's no reason to feel like highly distressed or guilty about it. And so it's it's interesting because he spends the whole book, talking about this. An example, of course, is that said, it's a Dave Barry humorous book, so it's funny, and it's approached in ways like with this, where he's talking about writing and Japanese, and how Japanese writing is supposed to be vaguely pictographic. It's not phonetic. It is in a concept that I have never really quite grasped because I've never gone to the effort of learning anything about Chinese writing or Japanese writing or any other writing of the region which is not fundamentally phonetic. But he's talking about how, if bird looked like this and politician looked like this, then you could form a simple sentence like this: smiling bird, dog with politician in stomach. And even a child would easily understand the meaning, which he's got a subtitle which says, "The bird smiled when the dog ate the politician." But the Japanese Chinese characters don't look anything like the concepts they're supposed to represent. They all look approximately like this. And that's the thing, is that when you have a language where the writing in it is not phonetic, where you say, this symbol means ah, and that symbol means s, and this symbol means then you don't have to be nearly as careful as something where one symbol means horse and the next symbol means dog and the next one means cat, because theoretically all of those animals are quadrupeds and could possibly all have very similar symbols with only a small difference between them. Now, I don't actually know anything about kanji or, anything to do with Japanese or or Mandarin/Cantonese writing, which I understand are very closely interrelated as writing forms. But the point is that theoretically they could be very, very similar, and changing a single line could change everything. And so his approach to it is very much, I don't understand how this works. And I don't get it. And the fact that I don't get it is, the fact that he doesn't get it, the way that he and his family don't get it, those are where the humor in this lies. Going to a baseball game where nobody cheers, and he decides at one point to cheer on one of the players whose name is Hara, and he, shouts, "Come on, Hara," and everyone turns and looks at him because, what is this crazy foreigner doing? You don't shout during a game. You watch in respectful silence because that's what you do. You have respect for the players. And, so this is really a book about, one, him bumbling around in Japan, not really understanding what's going on, and two, being amused by the way that the Japanese don't quite get American stuff. It is, of course, interspersed with the usual personal stories, like the time that he and his friend got so drunk that they managed to go and throw up repeatedly on the lawn of the towns, of the small town or city that he was growing up in, to throw up on the chief of police's lawn because, of course, that's the best thing to do. And all of those little things that make up a Dave Barry book. And it's an enjoyable enough read. It is not one of the Dave Barry books that has put me in stitches. I will not say that. It's not one of the books that I found just absolutely hilarious. But it's certainly amusing enough in its way, and it is worth reading if you want to be serious about things. If what you're looking for is a book that's really that is really very much about the cultural divide between groups of people and how things look from the outside. Because, of course, it's one thing to say we should all be respectful of other people's cultures, but it's a good thing to read something like this, which is gentle and good-humored, but still points out that things from the outside can look remarkably silly, and indeed, you can criticize things from the outside. The Japanese have things that they can criticize about the American perspective, about the way Americans are uncouth and rude and a whole bunch of other things like that, whereas Americans can look at the Japanese and say, there's too much politeness, there's too much formality, there's a reason, there's something deeply disturbing about a society that so very, very much values uniformity to the detriment of the individual in this way. And so it's a good book, it's a fun book, but I wouldn't say it's Dave Barry's funniest book. It's also not Dave Barry's least funny book, which is the award that I personally would give to Dave Barry Turns 50, which is a book that, frankly, I didn't find funny at all, and think of as probably his greatest failure because it's just not funny, in my opinion. Anyhow, that's everything, and I guess, since I'm more or less out of time, I'll wrap it up here, and I'll see you all next week.